The prairie wind cut sharp against the skin as the sun sank low over the western horizon, painting the sky in flames of orange and crimson. Dust rose in thin spirals from the dry earth, clinging to the faces of two small children who stood trembling on the open land. Their clothes were torn, their eyes heavy with fear, and their tiny hearts pounded in a world that had already been far too cruel to them. The boy, older by only a few years, pressed his lips tightly together as he stared at the weathered boots of the men before him. He felt the weight of every moment that had brought them here, and then, with all the courage he could summon, he whispered words no child should ever have to speak. "Spare my sister." His voice cracked, but his eyes held firm. "Take me instead." The silence that followed was so deep it seemed as though the entire earth was listening. The rancher, hardened by years of dust, storms, and sorrow, froze where he stood, for he had not expected such words from a child. And yet, in that single moment, something in his soul began to shift, an ache, a remembrance, and a pull that would change everything. The children's journey had begun long before this desperate plea. Their names were Samuel and Anna. Samuel was only 9, yet his small face already carried the shadows of responsibility far too heavy for his young shoulders. Anna, just 6, clung tightly to a ragged doll whose seams had begun to unravel as if mirroring the frayed pieces of their lives. Together, they had endured more loss than most grown men or women could bear. Their father, once a hard-working ranch hand, had died in a tragic accident while breaking a wild horse, leaving the family fractured and reeling. Their mother, weakened by illness and grief, passed away in the bitter cold of winter, leaving Samuel and Anna entirely alone in a world that showed them no mercy. Since then, the children had wandered from place to place, surviving on scraps of food and the fragile hope that kindness might one day find them. They hid from strangers who sought to harm them, slept beneath the open sky, and prayed each night for someone to finally see them not as burdens but as children desperate for love. On one such day of wandering, they stumbled across the sprawling land of a man known simply as the rancher. He was tall, with lines carved deep into his sunburnt face and a reputation for being as cold and unyielding as the steel of the branding iron he carried. People said he had lost his family years ago and since then had built walls of silence and stone around his heart. No one dared cross him. No one ever asked him for kindness. Yet here stood Samuel and Anna, fragile, starving, covered in dust, their pleading eyes speaking louder than words. The rancher looked at them long and hard, his heart at war with his mind. He had seen children before, even turned them away, convinced that he had nothing left inside himself to give. But there was something in Samuel's gaze, steady, brave, and filled with sacrifice, that pierced the iron shell around his soul. And in that moment, for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him, something dangerously close to hope. When Samuel whispered his plea, offering himself in place of his sister, the rancher felt a jolt, as though he were staring into a reflection of the man he once had been, before grief and loss hardened his heart into stone. He could not shake the boy's words, nor the fierce resolve in eyes far too young to hold such burdens. Days passed, and though the rancher told himself he should send them away, he never did. At first, his gestures were small and silent, placing food on the table without a word, watching as Anna clutched her ragged doll as though it were the last piece of her mother she had left. Samuel would always wait until his sister was fed before taking a bite for himself, his thin arms and weary frame betraying the sacrifices he made daily. The rancher began to notice more than just hunger in their eyes. He saw Samuel's willingness to help, the boy's determination to carry water buckets, sweep floors, or mend small things, even when his body trembled from exhaustion. And though rare, Anna's laughter occasionally broke through the heaviness, its soft and sweet melody carrying a warmth that seemed to soften even the harshest of days. Slowly, without realizing it, the rancher began to feel something he had buried long ago, the stirrings of family. But the road to acceptance was not without resistance. The rancher's men, hardened cowhands who had followed him through years of toil and storms, began to grumble among themselves. They whispered about the children, calling them strays, useless mouths to feed, and trouble waiting to happen. One man even said aloud that the rancher should never have taken them in, his words sharp and unkind. Samuel overheard this one evening as he carried heavy buckets of water, his small frame straining under the weight. Shame and fear pricked at his young heart, and later that night, as Anna drifted to sleep, he whispered a promise into the dark. If the rancher ever chose to send them away, he would not beg, but he would do everything in his power to protect her. That vow, spoken with the quiet resolve of a child who had lost too much, settled on his shoulders like iron. Yet the rancher, though silent, had been listening as well. Standing by the window of the children's small room, he had heard Samuel's whispered promise. The words struck him harder than any storm that had ever swept across the prairie. Here was a boy with nothing to his name, no family, no home, and yet he carried within him more love, more bravery, and more selflessness than many grown men the rancher had known. That night sleep eluded him as he wrestled with questions he had long buried. Could he risk opening his heart again, after all these years? Could he allow himself to love these children as his own, when the ghosts of his lost family still haunted him? And worse, what if he failed them, just as he had failed before? The answer came in the harshest of tests. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long over the ranch, strangers rode onto the land. Rough men with eyes glinting with greed and cruelty dismounted, their intent as sharp as their voices. Word had spread of 2 wandering children, and they had come not with compassion, but with the desire to take them, sell them off for labor, use them for profit. Before the rancher could even step forward, Samuel moved. Small as he was, he spread his thin arms wide in front of Anna, his body trembling but his voice firm. With a courage far too large for his years, he shouted that if the men had to take someone, they should take him. His words rang out across the silent ranch yard, carrying with them the weight of sacrifice, love, and a bravery that defied his size. "Spare my sister. Take me instead." The words, trembling yet steady, fell from Samuel's lips as Anna clung to his arm, sobbing into his sleeve. The rancher stood frozen, watching this small boy fight a battle no child should ever be forced to face. And in that moment, something broke open inside the rancher's chest, a crack in the wall of stone he had built around his heart. With a voice that thundered across the wide, open plains, he ordered the intruding men to leave. His hand gripped the handle of his rifle, his stance unyielding, and his eyes blazed with a fire so fierce that none dared challenge him. The strangers, recognizing the depth of his resolve, hesitated only for a breath before retreating, leaving behind nothing but the churned dust of their horses' hooves. When silence finally returned to the rancher turned toward the children. His hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of a decision that had already taken root in his heart. Slowly, he knelt before Samuel and Anna, his weathered face softened by something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. His voice, once sharp and commanding, now carried a gentleness long forgotten. He told them that they would not face this cruel world alone ever again. From that moment forward, he declared, they were his children, and no harm would touch them while they lived under his care. Anna's tears streamed down her dirt-streaked cheeks as she buried her face into the rancher's worn coat, clutching her ragged doll tightly between them. Samuel, though he tried to hold his composure, let his own tears fall freely. His small hands clutched the rancher's arms with desperate strength, as though afraid that this promise might dissolve into the wind. But the rancher meant every word. For the first time in years, he allowed his broken heart to open again, to love again, and in doing so, he bound himself to these children not out of pity, but out of a fierce and unshakable devotion. The seasons passed, and with them life on the ranch changed in quiet but profound ways. Samuel grew stronger with each passing day, his thin frame filling out as he worked side by side with the rancher, learning the ways of horses, cattle, and the unforgiving land. Anna's laughter, once scarce and fragile, began to ring out across the fields, soft at first, then bright and full, carrying with it the innocence that hardship had nearly stolen. Her doll, once unraveling at the seams, was mended carefully by the rancher's own hands, each stitch a quiet vow of the care he had promised. The men who had once grumbled about the children now watched in silence, their hardened expressions softening as they witnessed the change in the man they followed. Some even found themselves smiling, though they said little. The rancher was no longer the man of stone they had once known. He had become a father again. And in protecting these two children, fragile yet brave, he discovered something he had thought forever lost. He found not only the strength to love, but also the redemption his soul had been searching for all along.